today's my birthday, turning 23, for those curious. So F it, I'm gonna tack this as an excuse to speak about something I really want to do a video on, and that's the fact that Charles Leclerc's 2017 Formula 2 season was incredible, to the point where he apparently had more dope tests than anyone else that year. I'll come back to that later in the video, but okay, I'll be honest, I don't really need an excuse to do a video speaking about something to do with my favourite driver. Anyway, heading into the 2017 Formula 2 season, at the time 19-year-old Charles Leclerc had signed on to drive for Prema, an Italian team very well known in the junior Formula spaces, and a team who the previous year, their first season in the category, which was at the time known as GP2, had taken both the team's championship and the driver's championship at the hands of Red Bull junior driver and also good friend of Leclerc, Pierre Gasly. Our other 2016 driver was future 24 Hours of Le Mans winner Antonio Giovinazzi. But Leclerc came into his rookie and only F2 season as the reigning GP3 champion and found himself teaming up with fellow Ferrari Driver Academy driver Antonio Fuoco. And well, it was pole on debut for the Monegasque, and not by a small margin either. The gap to the guy who'd qualified P2, who was his own teammate, was 6.5 tenths in his first F2 qualifying session. In fact, the gap to the closest returning driver was just shy of 8 tenths to Norman Nato in P4. Anyway, with the 4 points for pole in the bag, the feature race was up first. At this time, by the way, the format saw the feature race on the Saturday and the sprint race on the Sunday morning, with the grid for that determined by the results of the feature race, with the top 8 reversed. Just an FYI for those who don't know, and also it was 15 points for a sprint win down to 1 for 8th place at the time, pulled to the 10 for a sprint win down to 1 for 8th as it is today. But he ended up slipping backwards a couple of places during the feature races. Artem Markelov and Norman Nato would both pass him for finishing first and second respectively, but it would still be a podium on debut with P3 for Leclerc, meaning he would line up P6 on the grid for Sunday's sprint race, which was one of those stand up and take notice kind of performances, if you know what I mean. Kind of like that one GP2 race from Hamilton in Turkey back in 2006. He went from 6th to 3rd on the opening lap, and come the start of lap 9, he'd made a move for the lead heading into turn 1, and then he just checked the F out, pulling a gap of 9.5 seconds by the start of lap 15. And there was a reason for pulling this big of a gap and setting the timing screens purple. They were planning a pit stop, which isn't something you see in a sprint race really. You don't have to make a pit stop, they don't do pit stops, so why do a pit stop then? Well, during the lockdown in 2020, Leclerc actually watched the highlights of this race that's available to view on F1's YouTube channel, and he did that on stream, and he revealed that he wasn't great at tyre management back then, and so he and the team had worked out what lap times he would need to do and what gap they would need to have to be able to make a pit stop strategy in the sprint race work. He emerged from that pit stop then, which he took at the beginning of lap 15, down in 14th place, with around 8 or so laps remaining. You would think, nah, no way he can win this thing. Even if you're on fresh rubber while the rest of the field, bar Markelov, who'd also pitted, is on wearing rubber, nay why you can go from 14th to 1st in around 8 laps. No way it's possible. Yeah, clearly nobody tell Charles Leclerc that. He was basically unstoppable, passing car after car, fitting himself back into the points at turn 1 on lap 19, and then back into the top 3 at turn 4 on lap 21. Then heading onto the final 23rd lap of the race, he was right there with the leaders, passing Ollie Rowland into turn 1 for second, before taking full advantage of Luca Ghiotto's small mistake through turn 4 to walk through the door he'd opened and retake the lead and go on to claim his first race victory in Formula 2, from 14th to 1st in 8 laps. That race win, with the fastest lap to boot, with the 3rd place from the feature race and the 4 points from pole position, meant that after the opening weekend it was Leclerc leading the championship by 8 points, and well, he wouldn't exactly let go of that championship lead. Next up was Barcelona, where Leclerc backed up his Bahrain pole position with a Barcelona pole position to make it 2 poles in a row, and not by 6 tenths this time, it was by just under 2 tenths here. And despite finding himself under a bit of pressure in those early stages, he, unlike Bahrain's feature race, he would convert this pole position into a 2nd win in a row and his first feature race victory of the year, giving him a P8 start for the sprint race, during which he would climb up to finish P4. And all of this allowing him to extend that 8-point lead in the championship to a 26-point lead. Now we come to the Monaco round, and well, We all know how this goes for Charlie boy. In fact, this is where the Monaco curse started. He would kick things off quite well with his third consecutive pole position. And by the way, taking a look at that lap in question, I'm gonna be honest and say I've no bloody clue how he did end up getting pole in the end. Because two things: one, the lap started with a lockup into turn one, and two, he touched the wall coming out the tunnel. It wasn't by any means a polished lap, in my opinion. But anyway, he would end up retiring for both races of the weekend. After leading in the early stages of the feature race, he would end up having a mechanical failure on the suspension. And now at the time, Leclerc had a column he did for motorsport.com through the F2 season. I'll link them below in the description for anyone who wants to give his F2 columns a read, by the way. And in the Monaco edition, he said that the camber shims had broken, and they, as in the team, thought that even though the pit stop he'd made under a safety car that had come out was normal, the shock from removing a tyre and fitting a new one could have been enough for the failure. His sprint race retirement would come via a collision with Norman Nato when trying to pass him whilst trying to make his way up the field for starting at the back. But he still led the championship at the end, so that's something, but only by 3 points now. The following round took place in Azerbaijan, and while we all kenned what had happened prior to the weekend for Leclerc, his father had passed away. But despite that, Charles would go on to have perhaps the strongest weekend of the season. And I would argue it belongs up there as one of the strongest weekends of his entire career. He went into qualifying after struggling a bit in practice, but he put those struggles behind him and managed to pull out a pole lap 5.5 tenths quicker than P2's best effort. In his Baku column, he'd commented that after that pole lap was perhaps the most emotionally difficult moment of the weekend for him. And now we all know how F2 in Baku is. There's gonna be safety car upon safety car, cautions will breed cautions, and this time was no different. But there was also a red flag just a few laps away from the end of the race, and due to there being only a few laps left, the race wasn't resumed and the results were taken for the end of lap 24, and Leclerc declared the race winner, with the fastest lap to boot, and much to the delight of said Monegasque and his team, I think, so as they wouldn't have to deal with the potential losing the lead on another restart. In the sprint race, he'd worked his way up from a P8 start to taking the lead. However, he did encounter a few problems during this race, mainly one big problem, because at one point during his time of making his way up the field, he had encountered yellow flags at turn 3, and he did back off, as you're meant to when you're going through yellow flag zones. However, due to pushing a lot, he'd gained more time through the rest of the sector than he'd lost through backing off, so the sector is still flashed up as a personal best, and F2 doesn't, or at least didn't at the time, have mini sectors. So we got dinged with a 10-second time penalty for it. Charles once again scored the fastest lap of the race and did cross the finish line in P1, however due to the time penalty he dropped back to P2. Out of a maximum total of 48 points he could have scored that weekend, he scored 45, giving him a 42-point lead in the championship. In the record books, he did not clean sweep the weekend. However, on track, it was a clean sweep, aside from practice. And this just after losing his father. Austria came next, and well, no guesses required as to who was on pole position. It's F2 in 2017, of course it was Charles Leclerc on pole, for the 5th time in a row and of the season. That pole would be converted into his 4th win of the season, and that's where his points scored in Austria would end, as the sprint race would end in retirement after spinning off the exit at turn 4 due to a small brush with his teammate. But this race was also the one where you may have seen the clip of Leclerc's race start to this race before, and it's his reaction at the start to avoid the much slower starting car ahead. It is quite frankly amazing. But despite the sprint race DNF, the championship lead was still extended up to 49 points. By the way, allow me to just take a moment to say, if you're enjoying this video and haven't already, then why not subscribe for more Formula 1 content for me? And drop a like if you're enjoying this video. The Nice round took F2 to Silverstone, where it was, yep, you guessed it, Charles Leclerc on pole position once again for a record equaling 6th consecutive time. The record of 6 consecutive poles originally set by Stoffel van Dorn between the 2014 and 2015 GP2 seasons. But again, this pole was by quite a margin, half a second, and he did end up winning the feature race, but holy shit, the route to getting that win definitely wasn't easy for him. So when he was on his way to the grid, he was trying to warm up the brakes, as you do, and upon getting to his grid slot, he noticed that his left front brake was on fire. Not a great way to start things, but they got it handled pretty quickly, all was fine, the race got underway and everything was going well. Then towards the end of the first stint, Leclerc saw when he was driving on the straight on one of the big screens that someone's car was smoking. It turns out that it was his car that was smoking. He commented in his Silverstone column on motorsport.com that he was expecting to have to pull over because smoke pouring through your car, it normally means your engine's buggered. It's not a good sign, and that's a fair thing to think. But his steering wheel didn't show any problems, the team didn't exactly know what the cause was, and a few corners later, when he checked his mirrors again, the smoke had died down. So he continued. It turned out some oil had leaked out and into the exhaust, and that's what was causing it. The race calmed down again and all was fine. And then he noticed later on in the second stint that his left wing mirror was missing. So yeah, on fire twice, lost his left wing mirror, and still won the bloody race by almost 9 seconds. The sprint race was a lot calmer than the feature race had been, working his way from his P8 starting position to finishing P5 with the fastest lap of the flag, giving him a 67-point lead in the championship. So right about now I feel like it's a good time to circle back to that dope test comment I made at the start of the video, then we'll get into the remainder of the season. Now, I do not know where this clip originates from. If anybody knows, then please let me know in the comments. And I do not know from what point in 2017 it was from. Again, if you know, then please let me know. But I saw this pop up on my Twitter timeline in October last year with someone sharing it, and just roll the clip.
And so one of the first places I headed for was Prema. They've done a brilliant job over the years, since the 80s actually. They've been around a long time. And this year, they're really in the headlines again with Charles Leclerc dominating Formula 2, to the point where virtually everything he does now is questioned. Apparently he's had more dope tests than any other driver in the paddock, including Formula 1 this year.
Charles Leclerc dominated the season so much, he basically had the FIA going, yeah, nah, there's no way this guy's legit, there's no way. And proceeding to get him to do more dope tests than anyone else, even F1 that year, apparently. But that's a small fact I feel like some may not be aware of that I just fancied throwing in because it is wild. And I'm gonna be honest, it is believable. But now let's head on over to the Hungary round, where Leclerc would break the record for the most consecutive pole positions in this category by sticking his Prema car P1 in qualifying by a few tenths before he got excluded from the qualifying session for a technical breach, meaning he had to start for the back of the grid. But that didn't exactly slow him down, as he fought back by starting at the back of the grid to finishing the race in P4, at one point making a brilliant 3-car overtake at the first couple of corners at one point. Coming back for the back to finish 4th, it kind of makes you think that he most likely would have won the race had he actually started on pole. He would have another 4th place finish in the sprint race, but with his nearest challenger Ollie Rowland finishing on the podium in both races, the lead in the championship had come down to 50 points. The following round took place in Belgium, and Leclerc was back on pole position once again, and for what wouldn't be the last time in Spa, the gap to P2 on the grid won't be massive. 6.5 tenths, not too dissimilar to the gap he had to P2 in 2019's Belgian Grand Prix. But that pole position would end up being converted into his 6th win of the season, 7th not counting penalties, 7th on the road, to word it that way. And he won, according to his motorsport.com column, by 26 seconds apparently. In fact, in his column he says that his pace was really good and he was trying to push it to the end, and at one point his engineer had told him to calm down and to be careful for the tyres over the radio. But he had the win until he got disqualified for the race because the plank was too worn out. Despite the disqualification, he would still start in 8th place for the sprint race, where he made his way up to finish in 5th place, giving him a 59-point lead in the Drivers' Championship with 3 weekends remaining in the season. And now it's on to Monza, where Leclerc, given he drove for an Italian team and was part of an Italian F1 team's driver academy, would have been hoping to nab a win in Italy, but he also mathematically had his first opportunity to wrap up the championship this weekend. Yes, with 2 full weekends still to go after this one, he had a chance to wrap up the Drivers' Championship already. But that's not quite how things would go, as this would be the first and only time this season where he would walk away having scored no points all weekend. For the first time in the season, he would not set the quickest time in qualifying, instead he would qualify down in 7th place. But thanks to a wet feature race, he managed to take advantage and work his way up to eventually have a chance to fight for the win on the last lap. But that battle ended in, as Charles himself worded it, when he, as in De Vries, had turned into him when they went side by side. He ended up finishing in 17th, where he'd start for Sunday's sprint race, and he worked his way up to finish P9. But I suppose the good thing for Leclerc was that Roland also hadn't scored anything, so the standings still stood the same. The penultimate round took place at Jerez, where Leclerc took his 8th pole position of the season, which to this day is still a record for the most poles in a single season. And that pole position meant that the gap to P2 had gone from 59 points to 63, and with 65 left available after Saturday's sprint race, Charles just needed to make sure he finished a few points ahead of Roland to secure the title. That's exactly what he would do because he won the race. But he almost lost it after a safety car came out towards the end of the race. And over at Prema, right after said safety car had gone in, they'd slightly miscounted the number of laps remaining. They thought there was just one more lap, but quickly realised it was 4 more laps. A small mix-up, but in the end he held on for the race win and the championship win. And yes, this was that time when they played the wrong bloody anthem on the podium. They got there in the end, but instead of initially playing the Monegasque national anthem, they first mistakenly played the French national anthem. Whoopsie daisies. The sprint race would kinda be one to forget as he would only finish in P7 from his P8 start, but given he'd already won the championship, that didn't really matter. And a fun fact, to this day, Charles Leclerc is still the youngest champion of this category under any of its guises, having clinched the championship at 19 years, 356 days of age. But finally, we come to Yas Marina for the season finale. It was P6 in qualifying for Charles, which he would turn into a P2 finish for the feature race, but the sprint race was the race that held a slightly more memorable moment from this weekend. Having started P7, he worked his way up to be fighting with Alex Albon for the race win at the end of the race. On the last lap, it was still Albon leading, but with Leclerc right behind him, and with yellow flags out at the end of the second back straight, if Leclerc wanted to make a move to get his 7th win of the season, he would hit a make it by the end of the first back straight. As they were coming towards that first back straight, they made a bit of contact through the turn 5 hairpin, but that contact allowed Leclerc to be able to get a decent run out of the corner, and he was able to pull alongside Albon down the straight, despite Albon pushing it right to the inside edge. They were on the limit, but Leclerc got alongside and broke just a fraction later on the inside to make the move, which had Alex Jakes and Davide Valsecchi laying eggs about up in the commentary box.
He's Albon! Oh, he's hit him! They make contact! The leading pair collide! He's trying to maintain the victory! And Leclerc's all over the tire marbles! Leclerc's got the inside line! Can you believe that move? Charles Leclerc! Wow, that was magnificent! What a way to say goodbye to Formula 2 for Charles Leclerc, who crosses the line to win!
Of the 22 races this season, he had 8 pole positions, 4 fastest laps, 16 points finishes, 15 of which were in the top 5, 10 of which were on the podium, and 7 of which were race wins. And not including disqualifications and penalties, so on the road, on track, he crossed the finish line in P1 9 times. Yeah, I can see why he apparently had more dope tests than anyone else that year. But anyway, be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, drop a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you're new around here, and thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.